There's this weird thing that happens to a lot of people who make decent money. On paper, everything looks fine. They've got a good job, a steady paycheck, they're not missing payments on anything, and from the outside, their life looks pretty together. But underneath all of that, they're slowly drowning financially, and they don't even realize it until it's almost too late. It's not the dramatic kind of broke where you can't afford rent, or you're dodging collection calls. It's the quiet kind. The kind where you're making $75,000 or $100,000 a year, and somehow you still feel like you can't get ahead. Where every month you're wondering why there's nothing left over, even though you're being responsible. At least you think you're being responsible. The truth is, there are warning signs that show up way before you hit rock bottom, but most people ignore them because they don't fit the traditional definition of being broke. My name is Drew, and I've talked to enough people about their finances to know that some of the most financially stressed individuals are the ones who look completely fine on the surface. If you're starting to feel like something's off with your money, even though you have a good income, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, because what I'm about to walk you through might be exactly what you need to hear before things get worse. Let's start with the first sign, and this one is so common that it's almost become normalized. You're making more money than you did a few years ago, but somehow you don't feel any less stressed about finances. Think about that for a second. You got promoted, maybe you switched jobs for better pay, your income went up by $10,000 or $20,000 or even more, and yet here you are, still anxious about money, still checking your bank account balance before making purchases, still feeling like you can't really afford to take a vacation or handle an unexpected expense. That doesn't make sense, right? If you're making significantly more money, you should feel more comfortable financially. But instead, you feel basically the same level of stress you felt when you were making less. What's happening here is lifestyle inflation, but it's the sneaky kind that doesn't feel like inflation in the moment. When you were making $60,000, you lived in an apartment that cost $200 a month, drove a car that was paid off, and ate out maybe once or twice a week. Now, you're making $80,000, so you move to a nicer place for $1,800 a month. You got a newer car with a monthly payment. You're eating out 3 or 4 times a week because you can afford it now. You upgraded your phone plan, started buying nicer clothes, maybe got a gym membership at a fancier gym. None of these individual decisions seemed unreasonable when you made them. But collectively, they've absorbed every single dollar of that raise, and then some. You're making 30% more money, but spending 30% more money, which means financially, you're in the exact same position you were before, just with nicer stuff around you. And that's the sign right there. If your income has gone up significantly, but your financial stress hasn't gone down, you're quietly going broke. You're not building wealth. You're not getting ahead. You're just treading water at a higher income level. The second sign is that you couldn't cover a $1,000 emergency without using a credit card or payment plan. This one is brutal because studies show that something like 40% of Americans couldn't cover an unexpected $1,000 expense with cash. But here's the thing. If you're making a good income and you still can't do this, something is seriously wrong with your financial situation. $1,000 should not be a crisis when you're making $70,000 or $80,000 or $100,000 a year. It shouldn't require going into debt or setting up a payment plan. It should be an inconvenience, sure, but not a catastrophe. The fact that you can't handle this means your cash flow is way too tight, which usually means one of two things. Either you're spending everything you make with no buffer, or you're already carrying enough debt that there's no room for anything extra. Let me put this in perspective. If you make $80,000 a year, that's roughly $6,600 a month gross, or about $4,800 to $5,000 after taxes, depending on where you live. If you can't save up $1,000 out of $5,000 a month, That means 100% of your income is already allocated. You're spending every penny that comes in. There's no margin for error, no cushion for unexpected expenses, nothing being set aside for the future. You're operating at maximum capacity financially, which means any little thing that goes wrong, a car repair, a medical bill, a broken appliance, becomes a crisis that requires debt to solve. And once you start solving problems with debt, you're on a downward spiral because now you've got interest payments on top of everything else, which makes your cash flow even tighter, which makes the next emergency even harder to handle. It's a trap, and the fact that you're in it, despite having a good income, means you're quietly going broke. Third sign, you're contributing little to nothing to retirement, and you keep telling yourself you'll start later when you have more money. This is one of those things that seems reasonable in the moment, but is actually completely insane when you think about it logically. You're in your 30s or 40s, making a solid income, and you're putting maybe 3% into your 401k to get the company match, or maybe you're not contributing anything at all because you feel like you can't afford to reduce your paycheck right now. You tell yourself you'll start investing seriously once you pay off your credit cards, or once you get another raise, or once your car is paid off, or once your kid finishes daycare. There's always a reason to wait. But here's the problem with that logic. You're never going to have more money later if you're not building wealth now. The whole point of investing early is compound interest. Money you invest in your 30s has 30 or 40 years to grow. Money you invest in your 50s has maybe 15 years. The difference is massive. If you invest $500 a month starting at age 30, by age 65, at a 7% return, you'll have about $1.1 million. If you wait until age 40 to start investing that same $500 a month, you'll only have about $520,000 by 65. Waiting 10 years cost you over $500,000, and if you wait until 50, you'll have less than $250,000. You lose 3/4 of your potential wealth by procrastinating. So when you say you can't afford to invest right now, what you're actually saying is that you're choosing to be broke in retirement, because whatever you're spending that money on today feels more important. And maybe it is. I'm not judging your priorities. But you need to be honest about what that choice costs you. If retirement investing is always the thing you'll do later, later is never going to come, and you're quietly going broke in the sense that your future self is going to be financially screwed. The fourth sign is that you're regularly paying fees that could be avoided: overdraft fees, late payment fees, interest on credit card balances that you carry month to month. These fees are like a tax on poor financial management. And if you're paying them consistently, it means your financial situation is more chaotic than you're admitting to yourself. Let's break this down. An overdraft fee is typically $35. If you're getting hit with one of these every month or two, that's $350 to $400 a year that you're paying for the privilege of spending money you don't have. That's money that could have been invested. Late payment fees on credit cards are usually $25 to $40, and they often trigger your interest rate to jump to the penalty rate, which could be 29% or higher. So not only are you paying the late fee, you're now paying way more interest on your entire balance going forward. And speaking of credit card interest, if you're carrying a balance month to month and only making minimum payments, you're hemorrhaging money. Let's say you have $5,000 in credit card debt at 20% interest. If you're only paying the minimum, roughly $100 to $150 a month, you'll be paying that debt for years, and you'll end up paying thousands in interest on top of the original $5,000. That's money that's just gone, vanished into the ether, enriching some credit card company while you stay broke. The fact that these fees have become normal expenses in your budget is a massive red flag. It means you're living so close to the edge that small timing issues or minor oversights are costing you hundreds of dollars. And those hundreds of dollars add up to thousands over a year, which means you're actively working against yourself financially. You're not just failing to build wealth, you're paying extra money for the privilege of staying broke. Fifth sign, and this one's going to sting for a lot of people. You justify purchases by looking at the monthly payment instead of the total cost. This is probably the most dangerous mindset shift that happens when you're quietly going broke, because it completely distorts your understanding of what things actually cost. You're not thinking, can I afford this $30,000 car? You're thinking, can I afford $500 a month for the next 6 years? You're not asking, should I buy this $3,000 couch? You're asking, can I handle $100 a month for 30 months? Everything becomes about whether you can fit the payment into your monthly budget, not whether you can actually afford the thing itself. And this is how dealerships and furniture stores, and basically everyone selling expensive stuff, traps people into buying things they can't afford. Because here's what happens when you think in terms of monthly payments. You end up with a bunch of different payment obligations that all seem manageable individually, but collectively eat up your entire income. You've got a car payment, a furniture payment, maybe you financed some appliances, you've got student loans, a mortgage or rent, credit card minimum payments, and suddenly you look at your budget and there's nothing left. Every dollar that comes in is already allocated to some payment you committed to because it seemed affordable on a monthly basis. But what you've actually done is sold your future income to buy things today. You're not building wealth. You're not investing. You're not saving. Because all your money is spoken for by payments on stuff you bought months or years ago. And the really insidious part is that this feels normal. It feels like you're being responsible because you're making all your payments on time. But being able to make payments is not the same thing as being financially healthy. It just means you haven't defaulted yet. If your entire financial strategy is make all the minimum payments, you're quietly going broke. The sixth sign is that you have no idea how much you actually spend each month. You couldn't tell me within $500 what your monthly expenses are because you've never tracked them. You just sort of wing it, make sure the bills get paid, use your credit card for everything else, and hope there's enough money in your checking account to cover it all. And at the end of the month, the money's gone, and you're not entirely sure where it went. This is financial fog, and it's a huge warning sign because you cannot fix a problem you can't see. When you're not tracking your spending, you have no idea where the leaks are. You don't know that you're spending $200 a month on food delivery, or $150 on subscriptions you barely use, or $100 on impulse purchases at Target. You just know that somehow the money disappears. And the problem with financial fog is that it lets you live in denial about what's actually happening. You can tell yourself you're doing fine because you're not tracking the data that would prove otherwise, but your bank account balance doesn't lie. If you're making good money and you're still always running low before the next paycheck, it's because you're spending more than you realize on things you probably don't even remember buying. The people who build wealth know exactly where their money goes. They can tell you within dollars what they spend on groceries, gas, entertainment, everything. They're not obsessive about it necessarily, but they're aware. And that awareness is what allows them to make intentional choices about their spending instead of just letting money slip through their fingers. If you're in financial fog, you're flying blind, and you can't course correct when you don't even know you're off course. Seventh sign, you tell yourself you'll figure it out when you make more money. This is probably the most common lie people tell themselves when they're quietly going broke. They think their financial problems are an income problem, not a spending problem. If they could just make $10,000 more a year, everything would be fine. They'd be able to save, invest, pay off debt, all of it. Except they wouldn't, because they already proved they can't manage money at their current income level. And what happens to people who can't manage money when they get more of it? They spend more. We already talked about lifestyle inflation, but it's worth repeating because it's so critical. Your income is not the problem. Your habits are the problem. And habits don't change just because you're making more money. If you can't save 10% of a $60,000 income, you're not going to save 10% of an $80,000 income either. Because whatever you're doing with that extra money, it's not going towards savings. The people who are successful financially are the ones who learn to live below their means, regardless of how much they're making. They figure out how to save and invest when they're making $50,000. And then when they start making $100,000, they're saving even more because they kept their expenses relatively stable. But if you're always waiting for more income to solve your problems, you're going to be disappointed because more income just means more spending unless you fundamentally change your relationship with money. And the longer you wait to make those changes, the longer you stay quietly broke. You're not going to suddenly become financially responsible when you hit some magic income number. You become financially responsible by making different choices with the money you have right now, today. And finally, the eighth sign, you feel anxious or guilty every time you check your bank account. This is the emotional indicator that something is seriously wrong. Money shouldn't make you feel this way, not when you have a good job and a steady income. But if every time you open your banking app, you get that little knot in your stomach because you're not sure what you're going to see, that's your subconscious telling you that you're not in control of your finances. You're hoping there's enough money to cover whatever you need. You're relieved when there is, worried when there isn't. And that's not a way to live, especially not when you're making decent money. This anxiety is a symptom of all the other signs we've talked about. You're stressed because you don't have savings to handle emergencies. You're guilty because you know you're spending more than you should. You're anxious because you have no margin for error. And you're avoiding looking at the numbers because facing reality feels worse than living in uncertainty. But here's the thing about that anxiety. It doesn't go away by ignoring your finances. It gets worse. The longer you avoid dealing with the problem, the bigger the problem becomes, and the more stressed you feel. What you need to understand is that financial peace comes from control, not from income. You can make $200,000 a year and still be anxious about money if you're spending $210,000. And you can make $50,000 and feel completely secure if you're spending $40,000 and investing the difference. The amount doesn't matter as much as the gap between what comes in and what goes out. If you're feeling anxious and guilty about money despite having a good job, you're quietly going broke, and your emotions are trying to tell you something that your logical brain doesn't want to admit. So what do you do if you recognize yourself in these signs? Because I'm guessing a lot of you are seeing yourselves in at least a few of these. The first step is getting honest about where you actually are financially. Track your spending for 1 month. All of it. Every dollar. Figure out where the money is actually going instead of where you think it's going. Then look at your debt, your savings, your retirement accounts. All of it. Get a complete picture of your financial situation. Not the version you tell yourself is true, but the actual reality. It's going to be uncomfortable, but you cannot fix what you won't acknowledge. Next, you need to create margin in your budget. That means either cutting expenses or increasing income, and usually it means both. Look at those tracked expenses and find things you can eliminate or reduce. Cancel subscriptions you don't use. Stop financing things you don't need. Cook at home instead of ordering delivery. Drive your car longer before upgrading. Find $500 or $1,000 a month that you can redirect towards savings and debt payoff instead of lifestyle expenses. Then start building that emergency fund. Even if it's just $50 or $100 a month at first, start putting money aside for emergencies so the next time something breaks, you don't have to go into debt to fix it. Once you've got $1,000 saved, work toward 3 months of expenses, then 6 months, That buffer is what eliminates the anxiety. And finally, start investing for retirement, even if it's a small amount, even if it's just 5% of your income. Something is infinitely better than nothing because of compound interest. The sooner you start, even with small amounts, the more time that money has to grow. And as you get your spending under control and create more margin in your budget, you increase that percentage. The goal is to eventually be investing 15% to 20% of your income, but you don't have to get there overnight. You just have to start moving in that direction instead of continuing to ignore it. Look, being quietly broke is almost worse than being obviously broke, because at least when you're obviously broke, you know you have a problem. When you're quietly broke, you keep telling yourself everything is fine while the situation slowly gets worse. You've got the income to fix this. You've got the resources. You just need to make different choices. Stop upgrading your lifestyle every time your income goes up. Stop financing things you don't need. Stop ignoring your spending. Stop waiting for more money to solve the problem. Start tracking. Start saving. Start investing. And start building actual wealth instead of just the appearance of it. Because the difference between looking successful and being successful is everything. And right now, if you're recognizing these signs, you're just looking successful while quietly going broke. Change that. You've got the income. Now you need the discipline.